10 is only 3 verses long, but 9 is 25 verses. No, 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 no. Sorry. It's 32 verses long. So, anyway, I just want to go on ahead and start and welcome everybody that's here and anybody that might be listening in to Redemption Life Center at 28906 East Admiral Place in Catoosa, Oklahoma 74015. And we have church services on Sunday mornings at 10:30, and on Wednesday nights we have a Bible study at 7:30. And you are more than welcome to stop by and see us and join us. So we've been studying about Queen Esther, and basically she's a true example of when we submit to the Lord and do things His way, things turn out victoriously. Now, do they turn out according to our original plans and purposes? No. But they do go along according to God's plan and purpose. And He has a plan and purpose for each and every one of us. It says so in Jeremiah 29:11. But if we will do things God's way and let Him direct our path, things will turn out very good, and all things will work together for good for those that love the Lord. They don't always go according to our plans, and they usually change our plans. I know God has changed my plans many a times throughout my life to line up with His. And just remember that when something doesn't happen that makes you unhappy, because it didn't go your way, God's got a reason for allowing it. He uses lots of things in our lives to direct our path in the direction He would have us to go. But we will always be happier when it's all said and done if we will just do what He tells us to do. And it'll benefit more people than just ourselves when we do things His way. So anyway, Queen Esther, if you don't know a whole lot about her, I would like to encourage you to read the first few chapters. Well, just read the whole book of Esther, because it's quite a story. It's amazing how things worked out. So we're going to start out, excuse me, my nose is itching. In chapter 9, and read verses 1 through 10. Do I have a volunteer to start? Are you ready, Josie?
Yeah, we start at 9.
Chapter 9 and verses 1 through 10.
Okay.
And she's reading out of the Living Bible. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and its decree drew near to be put in execution in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. How do you say that?
Ahasuerus is how I say it, but I don't know if that's correct.
To lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants, and the deputies, and officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces for this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with a stroke of the sword, and slaughter, and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and Pahasteda, and Delphon, and Asja, and Portotha, and Adalia, and Aridatha, and Parmestha, and Arisa, and Aranda, and Vujasa, the sons of Haman, the son of Hamadiah, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not that their hand.
Thank you. And you pronounce those just as good as any of us can that haven't studied on how to pronounce them. I used to have a Bible that helped me pronounce it, but over the years it is no longer usable. So I guess I need to find one that would replace it. But anyway, main thing is that we know that Haman, who was against Mordecai, his 10 sons were also killed. Okay? When people come against sons and daughters of God, God is not required to protect them, the ones that came against his people. So these people came against him, and so God hadn't protected him. All right, let's hear what the King James Version says. Okay, Dave, verses 1 through 10, please. Time out for technical stuff. I didn't realize I needed to turn that on, I guess.
Now in the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put in execution, in a day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the province of the king Ahasuerus to lay hand on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, and the lieutenants and deputies and officers of the king, helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan, the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And Parshandatha, and Dalphon, and Aspatha, and Poratha, and Adalia, and Aridatha, and Parmashta, and Arisai, and Aridai, and Vagisetha. That's it. To 9, verse 9.
10 through 10.
Then the sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they. Put on the spoil, laid they not their hand.
Thank you. And this is how the Amplified, I don't know why I have a hard time thinking of Amplified, version says. Now in the 12th month, the month of Adar, on the 13th day of Adar, when the king's command and his edict were about to be executed on the very day that the enemies of the Jews had planned for a massacre of the Jews, it was turned to the contrary, and the Jews had rule over those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hands on such as sought their hurt, and no man could withstand them. For the fear of them had fallen upon all the people. And all the princes of the provinces, and the chief rulers, and the governors, and they who attended to king's business, helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace, and his fame went forth throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai became more and more powerful. So the Jews smote all their enemies with the sword, slaughtering and destroying them, and did as they chose with those who hated them. In Shushan, the capital itself, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and they killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Portha, Adelia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisiah, Aridaea, and Vezatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Ahamadatha, the Jews' enemy. But on the spoil they laid not their hands. Okay. It's open for comments if anybody has any. That was a mouthful, but we have a lot to cover, so that's why I had to read 10 verses in a row. Anybody got a comment?
Sounds like they got busy.
Well, when your enemies come against you and God is for you, who can be against you? God turned it around really quick through various things, and if you want to know what those various things were, you need to go back and read the first 8 verses of Esther to see how it all came to pass. But God set the stage for this to happen. The enemies who thought they were going to destroy all the Jews, things got turned around to where the Jews were able to destroy the enemies. And so, and the man that headed up all the plan about destroying the Jews, he ended up getting hung on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai, because he was setting him up to be destroyed as well. And he was Esther's relative. And so, anyway, things got turned around because Mordecai had done some good deed to protect the king in the past from somebody that worked for the king who had plotted to kill the king. Some people that had. And so that plot was stopped, and those men were stopped and done away with. But there was a record made of it, but nothing was ever done about it. And then when the king discovered that, he made a big to-do about that, which happened to be on the same day when Haman was going to talk the king into killing Mordecai. And how can you talk the king into something like that when he's busy giving honor to that man that you were wanting killed. So and things got turned around, and it was quite interesting. But anyway, so now the whole plot to destroy the Jews in that area, which was a large area of land that the king was over, it got reversed. And so instead of the enemies of the Jews being killed, instead of the Jews being killed, the enemies of the Jews were killed. I said that in reverse. So anyway, but it makes them a special mention of the fact that when they killed all these enemies of the Jews, they didn't take the spoil, which usually when you beat an army or a people, you get to take the spoil, whatever good things are left behind by the people who got killed. So okay, let's read verses 11 through 19 and see what happens next.
Late that evening, when the king was informed of the number of those slain in Shushan, he called for Queen Esther. The Jews have killed 500 men in Shushan alone, he exclaimed, and also Haman's 10 sons. If they have done that here, I wonder what has happened in the rest of the provinces. But now, what do you want? If it will be granted to you, tell me, and I will do it. And Esther said, if it please your majesty, let the Jews who are here at Shushan do again tomorrow as they have done today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. So the queen and king agreed, and the decree was announced at Shushan, and they hung up the bodies of Haman's 10 sons. Then the Jews of Shushan gathered together the next day also and killed 300 more men, though again they took no property. Meanwhile, the other Jews throughout the king's provinces had gathered together and stood for their lives and destroyed all their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them. But they did not take their goods. Throughout the provinces this was done on the 20th day of February, and the next day they rested, celebrating their victory with feasting and gladness.
18 and 19 also.
But the Jews at Shushan went on killing their enemies the second day also, and rested the next day with feasting and gladness. And so it is that the Jew in the unwalled villages throughout Israel to this day have an annual celebration on the second day, when they rejoice and sing gifts to each other.
Thank you. Dave, 11 through 19, please, in King James.
On that day, the number of those that were slain in Shushan the palace was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is thy petition, and it shall be granted thee? Or what is thy request further? It shall be done. Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 70 and 5,000, but they laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and a day and of sending portions one to another.
Thank you. And the Amplified says, and on that day the number of those who were slain in Shushan, the capital, was brought before the king. And the king said to Esther, the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the capital, and the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted to you, or what is your request further? It shall be done. Then said Esther, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also according to this day's decree, and let the dead bodies of Haman's 10 sons be hanged on gallows. And the king commanded it to be done. The decree was given in Shushan, and they hanged the bodies of the Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews that were in Shushan gathered together on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men in Shushan, but on the spoil they did not lay their hands. And the other Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered to defend their lives, and had relief and rest from their enemies, and slew of them that hated them 75,000. But on the spoil they laid not their hands. This was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Shushan assembled on the 13th day and on the 14th, and on the 15th day they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelled in the unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a holiday, and a day for sending choice portions to one another. Do we have any comments?
Yeah, I wouldn't be celebrating too soon.
Well, it's just the whole thing is kind of shock because it wasn't what was expected, but it was what was just and right in the sight of God, evidently, because He allowed it. So,
I think there's a scripture something about don't something about when you see your enemy fall, don't
rejoice.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I remember reading that, and I can't remember where it's at either. But we are to be sorrowful that it had come to that. That our attitude, God is more concerned with our attitude. Yeah, justice can be done, but we don't need to be throwing a party over it. I see where you're coming from, and that you're right about that. Yeah. So if we're in a war and we win, we can be joyful that we won, but we can be sad for those lost souls that lost. And so that makes sense because God created everything, and yeah.
It's sort of a celebration because it marks a day of of when the end of your enemy has come. It's an event that you're celebrating and not actually the death of them.
Right, right. And there is a difference. Yeah. Yeah. It's sad that people have to lose their lives through stuff, but um, the the victory was won, and that's the part that needs celebrated. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and read verses 20 through 26. Okay, 20 through 26. Couldn't read my own writing, sorry.
Mordecai wrote a history of all these events and sent letters to the Jews near and far throughout all the king's provinces, encouraging them to declare an annual holiday on the last 2 days of the month, to celebrate with feasting, gladness, and a giving of gifts. These historic days when the Jews were saved from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned to gladness and their mourning into happiness, so the Jews adopted Mordecai's suggestions and began this annual custom as a reminder of the time when Haman, son of Hammedatha and Agatha, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted to destroy them at the time determined by a throw of the dice, and to remind them that when the matter came before the king, he issued a decree causing Haman's plot to boomerang, and he and his sons were hanged on the gallows. That is why this celebration is called Purim, because the word for throwing dice is Persian, is Pur. And where do you say?
26, the last one.
Okay.
Okay. Dave, will you read it in the King James, verses 20 through 26, please?
And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both nigh and far, to establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month Adar, and the 15th day of the same yearly, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, in the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them, because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, that is, the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that this wicked device which he devised against the Jews should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore all the words of this letter, and that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them.
Thank you. And the Amplified says, and Mordecai recorded these things, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to command them to keep the 14th day of the month of Adar, and also the 15th yearly, as the days on which the Jews got rest from their enemies, and as the month which was turned for them from sorrow to gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days of sending choice portions to one another, and gifts to the poor. So the Jews undertook to do as they had done, and as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is the lot, to find a lucky day to crush and consume and destroy them. But when Esther brought the matter before the king, he commanded in writing that Haman's wicked scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, after the name Pur, or Lot. Therefore, because of all that was in this letter, and what they had faced in this matter, and what had happened to them. Any comments? Well, it was definitely recorded, and it was they made it into a holiday, and they publicized it throughout all the provinces. So it was made public. It was very public. It's kind of what I got, and it's like, and those that wanted to harm the Jews, what they wanted to do to the Jews got done to them instead. And so the tables had been turned by God. So when we trust God, the evil that is planned against us will come to ruin, and God will give us the ultimate victory, is what we want to get out of that. Okay, let's read verses 27 through 32, which is the end of chapter 9.
All the Jews throughout the realm agreed to inaugurate this tradition and to pass it on to their descendants and to all who became Jews. They declared they would never fail to celebrate these 2 days at the appointed time each year. It would be an annual event from generation to generation, celebrated by every family throughout the countryside and cities of the empire, so that the memory of what had happened would never perish from the Jewish race. Meanwhile, Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, and later adopted by Mordecai, the Jew, had written a letter throwing her full support behind Mordecai's letter inaugurating his annual feast of Purim. In addition, letters were sent to all the Jews throughout the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with messages of goodwill and encouragement to confirm these 2 days annually as the Feast of Purim, decreed by both Mordecai the Jew and by Queen Esther indeed. The Jews themselves had decided upon this tradition as a remembrance of the time of their national fasting and prayer. So the commandment of Esther confirmed these dates, and it was recorded as law.
Thank you. Dave? Verses 27 through 32, please.
The Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed and upon all such as joined themselves unto them, so as it should not fail. But they would keep these 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter to Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed according as Mordecai the Jew, and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book.
Thank you. And the Amplified words it this way: the Jews ordained and took it upon themselves and their descendants and all who joined them, that without fail every year they would keep these 2 days at the appointed time, as it was written, that these days should be remembered, imprinted on their minds, and kept throughout every generation in every family, province, and city, and that these days of Purim should never cease from among the Jews, nor the commemoration of them cease from among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, gave full power, written authority, confirming this second letter about Purim. And the letters were sent to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, in words of peace and truth, to confirm that these days of Purim would be observed at their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had commanded the Jews, and as they had ordained for themselves and for their descendants in the matter of their fasts and lamenting. And the command of Esther confirmed these observances of Purim, and it is written in the book. Any comments?
Apparently, they don't celebrate or keep that today.
And I didn't research that, so I won't contest it and I won't agree with it.
And apparently, they probably started forgetting about that. Maybe some still remembered that when Jesus came, but a lot of things were changing before Jesus came, and that's why he came, because, well, it was time to bring about the new covenant, because the old covenant, God knew that it was coming to an end, the old covenant, because even the Jews back then weren't following the old covenant. They were bringing in all this other stuff, all these new books of their own, and then when you have Jesus talking to a lot of these religious people, the language that Jesus was using plainly described that they weren't following the ways of God, and so obviously they did not adhere to these writings of following this decree.
Very well said. Thank you for your comment. Any other comments? Okay, let's finish up then. Chapter 10, verses 1 through 3. Josie, will you start, please?
King Ahasuerus not only laid tribute upon the mainland, but even on the islands of the sea. His great deeds and also the full account of the greatness of Mordecai and the honors given him by the king are written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew was a prime minister with authority next to that of King Ahasuerus himself. He was, of course, very great among the Jews and respected by all his countrymen because he did his best for the people and was a friend at court for all of them.
Thank you. Dave, verses 1 through 3 of chapter 10, please.
And the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, And all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed.
Thank you. And the Amplified says, King Ahasuerus laid a tribute or tax on the land and on the coastlands of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and was a favorite with the multitude of his brethren, for he sought the welfare of his people, and spoke peace to his whole race. Are there any comments that anybody wants to, closing comments anybody wants to make in regards to the story of Esther and what we just read? Well, I'm going to, somebody else wrote this, but they called it Life Point, and they're talking about Esther and Mordecai. They received honor and position at the end of the story, but before they got to that point, they had to be willing to sacrifice everything to avoid the extinction of their people. And you remember how at first it was scary for Esther to go before the king, because in their culture, even the queen could not go before the king if the king didn't bid her to. And so if she did, she ran the risk of being killed. And if he held out the gold scepter to her, that means he was accepting her, and so she was not going to be killed. But she ran that risk just to go petition him for mercy for the Jewish people, and for herself and for Mordecai. But anyway, it's also in this life point that it says, they did not seek position for themselves, but unselfishly laid their lives on the line in obedience to God's purpose. They did not give up until their people were saved and the victory was won. And so in this life point, it encourages us to don't give up. Stand still. Trust God. Enter into his rest. And just like Mordecai, seek the welfare of others and speak peace to everyone you meet. Stop worrying. You know, you worry indicates you're not trusting God. And don't try to reason everything out, because that usually just gets you into trouble. And if you put your trust in, seek God's will and put your trust in him and do it his way, when it's all said and done, it'll be the best way it could have happened. It'll be a good thing that happens, and it'll benefit a lot of others and not just yourself. It's always good to consider what's good for others and to never give up. And those are my closing remarks. There's just so many good stories in the Bible that help us learn valuable lessons. And I don't know about you, but I need to read them over and over and over and over and over again. And every time I do get myself to read one of the stories again, I find out more things that I didn't notice before. And it's good to increase our understanding and our wisdom and our knowledge. and our way, our to increase our understanding of how God thinks, because we are made in His likeness and His image, and we need to have that understanding so that we can be lights to the world out there, even during tough times. And almost all the stories in here have good times and tough times in them, and show us what to do and what not to do in different situations if we'll just let the Word of God teach us what God would have us to learn in each and every one. All right. Are there any other comments? Do we have any praises?